Hello, sisters. Welcome to the Sacred Medicine Podcast, weaving powerful, soulful practices into functional medicine. Step into this beautiful space of devotion and explore everything from nurturing foods, rituals, sexuality, and awakening your innate sensuality. It is time to own your radiance. This is the Sacred Medicine Podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Sacred Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Margaret Romero, and this week's guest is Julie Parker. She is a certified life and business coach, as well as the host of the Priestess podcast. And this week, we talk about several things, and one of them is knowing the elements to having a soul-filled business. And as a lot of you may know, this completely resonates with me because I just feel it's so important that when you venture into entrepreneurship, into having your own business or practice, that it really needs to come from deep of the depths of your soul. And what I mean by that is something that completely resonates, something that completely drives you. And so we talk about what are some of these elements to having a soul-filled business. We also talk about getting over the fear. You know, there's a lot of fear in stepping out and having a business of your own. And that doesn't necessarily mean quitting your current job. So we talk about that as well as her path as a priestess and what that all means. So I was very intrigued by this. I love the term priestess. And coming from brought up Catholic, you know, there were just priests. There are no female or women priests or priestess in the church. It's just not allowed. So I just love the fact that there is this term priestess, and it's just this beautiful divine feminine archetype, and it's really it's ancient. So we talk about that and how that shows up in her life as well. And just so much richness in this conversation with her. So without further ado, on to the show. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Sacred Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Margaret Romero, and today's guest is Julie Parker. She's a certified life and business coach and host of the Priestess podcast. Welcome, Julie. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, Margaret, thank you so much for having me. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you.
I've heard of you just through many different outlets, Instagram, and I think we have a lot of people that we know in common too. So one of the things that I know about you is that you currently teach coaches. I want you explain a little bit about what you do exactly, because I'd really love to start off by diving in a little deeper into that.
Well, I have sort of two main passion areas in my life, and they don't intersect all of the time, but certainly do some of the time. And one is I'm the founder of the Beautiful You Coaching Academy, and we train heart-centered and gifted people to become life coaches and establish beautiful, thriving, intuitive, heart-centered businesses. And I also, in my more personal world, have been traveling the path of the modern day priestess for many years now, and am deeply devoted to the goddess and divine feminine. And while the academy, it's not a life coach training course that is steeped in the divine feminine or is all about the divine feminine, it can't help but be touched by those things because I suppose I'm the person that's at the helm. And whenever it is that you're embodying something as important to you as your spirituality and your essence and what it is that your values are and what you believe in and how you're trying to walk through the world, then of course that can't help but influence and touch all areas of your work and life. And so there's certainly elements of that touch the Beautiful You Coaching Academy and our life coach training course as well.
Beautiful. I love to learn a little bit more. So what are some of the things that you kind of focus on when a woman comes to you and maybe she's just not really sure, she's kind of ready to step into being a coach, and she is actually working through something herself and she wants to have a business, or maybe you're teaching someone to have a heart-centered business. What are some of the things that you really want to look for or have or be in order to make sure that happens, rather than just taking a job because or having a business because it'll look good or because it'll bring in a lot of money, but really making the focus really heart-centered so you can have a very soulful business?
Well, I think it's different for everybody. There are elements that are likely to be the same across a number of different types of people. But the one thing about owning and running and thriving in a heart-centered business that I think is so important is to understand that it actually and genuinely has to come from a place of joy and love and connection for you. And that sounds on the surface, Margaret, to be, well, kind of a no-brainer and just really easy. But the fact of the matter is that is often not how people start out businesses. And it's certainly not how people start out careers, because I think either ourselves or we know someone else who has started a career or a business because somebody else told them that it was a good idea. Or they started it because, or they moved into, and I see this sometimes with our coaches, they move into choosing a particular niche, or as my friends in North America, you say niche. So when I say the word niche, that's what I mean by that. They choose it based on their past education and the sphere of influence that they've had circulating around their world for a long time. But even though that exists and it's there, it might not necessarily be what their soul and their heart and their intuition is actually really calling them to do. But they feel that it's necessary for them to do that because it's what they know. It's like, well, I don't want to throw all of this out. It's what I know.
Right.
And that's where people veer away from the heart. You know, that's doing things out of obligation. That's doing things from a mindset of what you think is going to work and being all up in your head and not actually really dropping into your body and following your heart. And so running a heart-centered business is all about really listening to yourself and tapping into those deep parts that are genuinely, you know, calling you to bring forth, even if you've never brought them forth before. And I think the other thing that's really important when we're talking about heart-centered business as well, and this is something that I see that gets lost in the coaching and personal development world sometimes, is that you can have the most heart-centered mindset and business in the whole world with a beautiful website where you're out and bright and shining and you've got lovely photographs and a beautiful brand and everything looks amazing. But ultimately, in the end, if you are not skilled at the craft of what it is that you are putting out to the world that you do, none of those things will make a difference. And so that's why it's very, very important to me personally and us as a training academy to make everyone know right from the outset that your first and primary reason for being here is not a fancy website, and it's not a pretty brand, and it's not anything that is actually going to be anything past actually focusing on becoming a very skilled and wonderful coach. And that is what we focus on most of all, is the actual craft of how you are in service to other people. Because when you are that, it's going to come straight from the heart.
And do you mean that what it is that your gift is, like really focusing on what your gift and how you want to serve the world? Is that what you mean?
Well, I think it's that. That is an important part of it, but it's also actually about the actual craft of coaching. So how you hold space for people, how you ask powerful questions, knowing when to say something and when to be quiet, knowing when a client is saying one thing, but intuitively you're feeling that something else is going on. So it's not just about bringing out your actual gifts. It's also about bringing out your gifts in such a way that's very skillful, so that when people are in your presence, you actually can support them and help them. And so it's very important to have that tangible craft and skill behind you. Otherwise, all the heart-centeredness in the world isn't going to be able to help you when you've got a client sitting opposite you who is desperately stuck and or doesn't know what to do, and or is feeling into a space where they're, up leveling and they've got lots of fear and they don't know how to move beyond that. And so amongst all of the bringing out of your gifts, actually learning a craft and a skill that matches up with those is deeply important.
Okay, I get it now. And so what happens since you're focusing really on more heart-centered rather than what your brain is telling you is good or not good, or a path to go on or not go on. What I have seen is a lot of women tend to, and I definitely am guilty of this as well, a fear of stepping into something that feels really good in your heart, but there is a fear of like, oh no, like what if it doesn't work? Oh my God, I'm going to be maybe investing a lot of money in something, or what if I do and then it totally fails? These are all things that run through people's heads. How do you fight, or not fight, but how do you sort of get rid of these feelings, and how are you really dropping in to kind of get over the fear?
Well, I think the first thing is I really feel as though culturally and collectively and consciously, we all have to, but particularly women, develop a very new and radical and different relationship with fear. I hear people sometimes talking about words such as fearless, and I actually just don't believe that there is any such thing as someone who is fearless, and I don't think it's something that we should aspire to be. But what happens for us when fear raises itself, which is essentially just our ego, and we all have one of those, our little voice, our ego talking to us in opposition to our soul voice or our expansive voice, our true voice, our essence, is it's coming to us for a particular reason. And if we can actually look at it from the perspective of it being a teacher and a guide, we can completely change our relationship with it. So the example that you gave there, Margaret, is, sometimes when women entrepreneurs either start a business or they're going up to a next level in their business, that requires them to step out more and shine more and take bigger or riskier decisions. And that is often a time, in fact, it's the usual time that fear shows up. Mm-hmm. When we are comfortable, when we are settled, when we're not stretching or growing, it's a funny thing. Fear's not really around.
Right.
Like, it doesn't come to us. But it comes to us at these times, I think, as the perfect messenger to say, hey, I see you. You're stepping up. I'm coming to you because I'm asking you to really, really dig in here and ask yourself questions such as, how much do you really want this? How prepared are you to really put yourself out there and speak your truth and speak your honesty, instead of listening to it from the perspective of, oh my gosh, it's telling me not to do this. It's telling me, or I'm telling myself not to do this, or I'm coming up with lots of excuses and reasons as to why this is going to fail and why no one will look at me or book me or listen to me or follow me on social media. And I think if we can all try to actually see fear, the voice of the fear, as just the surface, there is a deeper meaning behind absolutely everything that our ego says. Our ego may shout the loudest, and it may be the thing that we hear the most or on the surface, but beneath that is our soul voice. But we have to be willing to crack through that fear in the beginning. And often for me personally, the way I do that is, if fear and my ego starts to shout at me, the very first thing that I do is, oh, hang on a second. Hello, you're here. Where did you come from, and why are you here? Let's talk. Mm-hmm. What are you trying to tell me? What's actually really going on here? Oh, okay. So you're telling me that this is going to fail, but my interpretation, my soul and essence interpretation of that is that you're only here because this is actually something that is deeply important to me. Mm-hmm. So thanks for dropping by, for the reminder. I get it. I now am even more empowered and connected to the fact that this is something that I've got to do. See you next time at the next up level.
And do you find that that works right away? Or I feel like the ego and the fear will just, it'll be there in 10 minutes or in 2 hours. It comes back and it comes back.
Well, I think it depends upon the person. For myself, that has been, working on this within my own essence and spiritual path for a really long time, I can honestly and genuinely tell you that as soon as I acknowledge it and work through it, it goes away. But that is something that doesn't make me special, and it certainly doesn't make me, it doesn't make me special in any particular way, but it's something that I've worked at, Margaret, over a very, very long period of time. And for anybody that does have a loud ego or a loud fear voice, the best thing that I can tell you is unquestionably that the more you do it and the more you choose to work with it and crack beneath the surface of the fear, the better you'll get. And then the next time it comes to you, it will be softer. And then the time after that, it may be a longer period of time before you hear it again. And then the time after that you hear it, it may stay at that same level for a while, but then all of a sudden you'll notice that when you start to question it, it does go away for longer and longer. And so it's something you've got to practice. It's something that you've got to work at. And of course, lots of other complementary things assist with it, such as being still, meditation, time in nature, really dealing in reality, surrounding yourself with beautiful sisters and supportive people, actually living a rich and beautiful life, whatever it is that means for you, are constantly things that combat this as well.
Great. Okay, I love that. So I'd love to just briefly talk about when you mentioned the path of the priestess, and you have a podcast called the Priestess podcast, and so I'd love, and since I'm so into all kinds of sacred practices and rituals and whatnot, I'd love to hear your version of what priestess means to you, so our audience knows a little bit about what that means and what that means to you.
Well, I'm really glad that you say what it means to me, because if you were to ask any woman who considered herself to be a priestess, I'm sure that you would get a slightly different, or possibly even a very different version of what, I'm about to explain to you. And That's really understandable, because what we're talking about here is a modern interpretation of what is a very ancient archetype and an ancient way of being. And so it stands to reason that lots of women are going to have very different interpretations of what that means for them in the year 2017 in the 21st century.
Right.
For me, the path of the priestess is one where it's twofold, really, or in fact, I'm starting to feel that it's actually threefold. First of all, it's about me having a devoted spiritual practice for myself that in particular is connected to the goddess and the divine feminine. And then my outer work with that is being in service to, in particular, other women, but it can be people as well, men and children, on their own spiritual path and journey. Because in essence, what ancient priestesses were, and I still feel as if that is their primary role today, it just looks very different, is that they were the earthly embodiment and conduit for people between the lower realms and the higher realms. In other words, they were there to help counsel and guide and support people on their spiritual journey through life. And I still believe that that is exactly what modern day priestesses do. It's just that we don't do it in temple anymore. You know, we don't have the ancient temples and we don't have the gatherings that we used to. Although in saying that, Margaret, that is shifting and changing. And so we have priestesses today who are healers and Reiki masters. They are nurses. They are holding red tents. They are conducting sacred circles. They're gathering women together to talk and heal and connect with energy and the goddess that is calling them. And they're counseling people, and some of them are coaches. It just looks different today than what it was. But it's all connected to a priestess being somebody that is there as a spiritual path or opener or guide for someone in exploring what their own divinity means to them.
Okay, I got it. So now, do you need to be trained to be a priestess? I know that there are definitely schools out there. Were you trained, and does someone need to have a particular training in order to become a priestess?
Well, this is a very good question. And it seems like such a simple question that would have a straightforward answer, and it does not. I am trained, although there is some contention around the word trained, because there are a lot of people that actually believe that you can't really train to become a priestess, that it is in fact a calling, and it's something that you embody often through a lineage of women in your family who have been healers, witches, priestesses of old, or women in deep service to their community and their world. Everyone has a very different perspective on what this means. I have chosen to be trained, and I do think that if you're going to be somebody that is really drawn to this path and really want to explore your own particular priestess gifts, I think that studying with a mystery school and, you know, exploring that for yourself is important. I know that it certainly helped me enormously. And one of the things that I love about the priestess training / remembrance / uncovering is really about tapping into what are your particular spiritual gifts, because priestesses, they all bring those out in different ways, and the different tools that priestesses use, which could be everything from runes to tarot cards, oracle cards, clairvoyance, psychic abilities, singing bowls, so many different things in different ways. You don't have to do all of them. And in fact, you're not expected to do all of them. It's about finding, again, what is the magic within you that's calling to come forth in support of your work. And so, you know, some people train, some people do not. Some people come from a very strong lineage. But to me personally, the most important thing, if you're going to really walk a path as a modern day priestess, is to understand that that means that it is a calling. It is not something that you just do for a couple of years and then just go, I don't want to do that anymore. It's a commitment that you make to undertake for the rest of your life. It's a path to walk from now until when you cross over, and it deeply, deeply involves being in service to others.
Now, I think that there can be some people may think, oh, what is that priestess? Is it like witchcraft? I think that sometimes comes up. Have you been asked this question at all?
Yeah, I absolutely have. And, I think it's a legitimate question. And I also think it's a legitimate connection that people make between the skills and beauty and extraordinary wonderfulness that is the witch and also the priestess as well. And I think that they're deeply connected for a number of reasons. They both, in an ancient sense, are connected to the persecution of women. Both witches and priestesses were involved in spiritual healing and supporting people. It's just that I think the difference between the two, and when we see, even if we take, for example, Margaret, like if you watch programs or movies such as The Mists of Avalon, or even looking at something in a modern context like Outlander or The White Princess, or any of those, Arthurian ancient type shows, you will often see a witch portrayed. And when I see those witches portrayed in those shows, the similarities between that and what potentially a priestess could do are very strong. It's just that witches were more, well, there's lots of differences, and I don't feel the energy of the witch within me as much. But the big difference for me personally is that priestesses were much more connected to the goddess and much more connected to the divine feminine. Witches, I feel, which is such an extraordinary gift of theirs, were much more connected to the common person. They were healers. They were midwives. They really got their hands dirty. Mm-hmm. They were right down in our root chakra. Like right. That's where the witch lives. Like she lives right, that energy of the witch lives right in our base. Whereas the energy of the priestess is in our crown chakra. She is talking about the spiritual realms, your connection with God, goddess, your higher self, your purpose for being here. So I've never actually described the witch and the priestess in those chakra ways before, but that's just come to me. So I hope that's helpful for people to understand, the difference. And I think in many ways that's also why the poor witch has been so misportrayed.
Yes.
She's portrayed as this old, haggy, horrible, even child-eating, man-eating, horrible sort of thing. And it's actually just not the case at all. Witches were extraordinary healers and midwives, and thousands, if not millions of people around the world back in the time when they were accepted and strong and powerful would owe their lives to them, and the magic of their use of healing and herbs and plant medicine and so many other things.
And just to, do you want to briefly describe what the chakras are for the listeners if they don't know what those are?
Well, I'm going to confess that that's not an area of speciality of mine. So I'm not really sure that I'm actually the best person to go into deep chakra explanation. I know you know more about that. So are you able to maybe explain to people like the difference between the crown and the root? Yeah.
So basically we have 7 chakra energy centers of the body, starting down from the root to the crown of the head, and the root being down sort of near the yoni area. And these centers have different colors, and they spin in a certain way. And when you have ideally you want your chakras to be opened and spinning nicely and equally. Now, sometimes there are blockages that happen, sometimes, and it'll show up as illness to some degree. And, I use a pendulum actually, and I test, my patients' chakras to see how they are, and then I can balance them out. And that you can also, there's so many things you can do with the chakras. Not only can you open them and balance them up, you can actually have your patient visualize a certain color, and you will actually see the pendulum swing even bigger, meaning that the energy is starting to open and starting to flow to that area. So you can visually open up your own chakras with or without assistance, but it's nice to be able to have someone there who is actually can see pendulum swinging. And you can also pair up chakras and enhancing the flow by adding certain essential oils, crystals. It's kind of like what I like to do. Everyone's different with what they do. So that's pretty much a little snippet on chakra work.
You explained that much better than I could have, Margaret. So thank you for that.
Okay. So as a priestess, this is something that you live, it's part of you. So it's not something that you think, oh, I'm going to just put on my priestess cap right now and do such and such. It's sort of, it weaves and it's blended into your daily life. Is that right?
Yes,
would you say?
Absolutely.
Yes. And so what does that look like compared to someone that's not a priestess? That's just, though I think that we're all goddesses and we all have divine feminine within us, you've been trained. So how is it? Share with us a couple of practices that you do that you're like, these are some of the things that I devote my day to, or I spend an hour doing such and such, or I really love doing this kind of ritual. I'd love to learn a little bit more.
Well, I think the first thing that I want to say is that me practicing these things is not necessarily not things that other women and other people do, and they may or may not be a priestess. You know, there are many, many rituals and practices and things that priestesses do that other women may do as well. And so I think that's important to mention there. So there are a number, and no day is the same for me. And that's particularly the case because I'm an entrepreneur and a businesswoman. You know, every day can look very different for me. And that's something that I'm very grateful for. From a personal perspective, I always have an altar, and that's very important to me. And I choose to change it often at the new moon or at a time when energy is calling me to change it. And most often my altars are dedicated to a particular goddess or energy that I'm trying to call in. For example, at the moment, it's dedicated to the energy of receiving. And so I have put some, beautiful color frequencies on there of pink and gold, and in particular feeling into the energy of Aphrodite and Lakshmi. And that was for a particular reason for me. I was really looking at trying to enhance my ability to surrender and receive. And so, lots of rose quartz and, beautiful pink and soft gold energy. I'm now actually feeling called to move into more of an Athena wise warrior type of energy with my next altar. And so that's going to come through with lots of purple and colors. I meditate and sit in stillness every day. I spend time in nature with the Great Mother, the greatest goddess of all, and feel her healing energy. Throughout the year, I observe the what is called the Sabbats, which is just simply the changing of the seasons. Things such as spring equinox, Samhain, which is the time of Halloween. Those sorts of things are really important because they give me a connection to the earth, and they also give me a connection to the higher realms as well. And I run sacred circles. I hold space for the Sacred Priestess Circle group on Facebook. So we're connected in there as a collective group of women. Anyone can join us if they would like to. And we make sure, we're just in there talking about, what's happening for us and celebrating different goddesses on their different days and talking about healing energy. One of the things we just started in there was just a thread of television shows and movies and things like that we can currently sort of explore and see different representations of the goddess and how they're being interpreted in modern days, and priestesses and witches as well. So it really looks different every day, Margaret. And, I do a lot of reading as well around mythical cultures and ancient cultures and modern spirituality, and constantly trying for myself to draw connections between those two things. I can't be in direct service to people as a priestess every day. Those days are gone for the modern day priestess, because temple sisters and temple priestesses in ancient times, they were nurtured and cared for and lived in those temples and were paid to be in spiritual service to people in that way. And I do feel as though I am that, but it looks very different. And so in many ways, my entire business and my gifts to the world are a devotional practice in and of themselves.
That's beautiful. I really love that. And when you were describing your altar space, it gave me such a beautiful visual, because I'm thinking that, so my altar in my bedroom, which is something, it's one of the very first things that I do in the morning as part of my morning ritual, is sit in front of my altar, and I just have a little routine that I do in the morning, aside from, prayer and visualization. I also do oracle card readings and things like that if I have questions. So you gave me an idea, because I really think it's beautiful to change your altar space. And I have been feeling that my space is feeling a little, what's the word I'm looking for? Stale. And you've given me an idea, and now I'm kind of a little giddy with me changing my altar and what that looks like, and even the beautiful covering that I have on it, just changing it up and depending on what I'm focusing on and what I'm working on. So thank you for giving me some really beautiful ideas.
Oh, you're absolutely welcome. And I think it's really important that anyone that has an altar or a little sacred space at your desk or beside your bed, or even a dedicated space, that you genuinely do think about shifting and changing the energy of that quite often. And, because otherwise it does get stale. We move beyond things, we call things in and we transmute them, and then it's time to shift into something else. So yeah, important.
Now, do you work with crystals as well? Do you do grids and things like that?
I do love crystals, and I absolutely believe in the power of their energy, but I must admit I wouldn't consider myself a crystal goddess in any way. I'm still sort of feeling into their power for me, and I love to put them on my altar, but I wouldn't say that I'm somebody that has an incredible connection to using their energy for things such as healing or grids or anything like that. I know some amazing priestesses who do. That is very much their gift. However, for me, I'm probably still just at that stage where I just, if I'm calling in some love, I'm going to reach out for the rose quartz, or, if I'm looking to sparkle with some abundance, then I'm going to grab some citrine, or if I'm working on my intuition and ability to hold space, I'm going to reach out for some amethyst. So I'm very much a user of them. I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a directoress of them.
I see. And so what would you say is one of the things that you reach for? What is that thing for you?
Do you mean
you said that some priestesses love using their crystals and others love using, well, you had mentioned a few things before, like runes and whatnot. Are you heavily into, I don't know, tarot or oracle cards, or like, what is the thing that you're just like always kind of go to, or is it always different?
Do you know, I'm someone where things are always a little bit different. I'm not trained in tarot, and I do love oracle cards, but for me, my priestess gift is a holding spiritual space. It is because I come from a counseling background and a coaching background. My go-to, or my priestess power, I suppose, if you want to call it that. Some priestesses are drummers, some are Reiki masters, some are oracle card or tarot users. For me, my priestess power is healing. It is the healing art of holding space and allowing somebody to reconnect back in with their divine power. So all of those things that we were talking about before, the moving beyond the ego, the managing fear voice, all of those sorts of things, that's where my priestess gifts lie.
That's really beautiful. That's a gift for sure. That is a gift for sure. And it's also just even you saying those words has me feeling very, if we were having a coaching session, let's just say, by what you just mentioned, it already makes me feel very nurtured and heard and seen and witnessed.
That's the whole idea.
Exactly.
That is the whole idea. Yeah, for sure.
Right. So just by you saying that, that's the feeling that I received. And yes, that is such a magical gift as well, because not a lot of people can hold space. That's for sure.
It's a lot more challenging than people think it is, because, one of the things that I really learned in my training and my journey thus far, and I'm still journeying and still learning and still uncovering, is that at a personal level, the great role of the priestess is to be in empty presence with people. And to be in empty presence with somebody means that you have emptied your mind of thoughts such as, am I doing it right? Is she looking at me? Is she understanding what I'm saying? Am I getting this wrong? She's going to think that I'm an idiot. She's going to think that I'm not doing anything to help her. And our great role is to work on ourselves and our ego and our little voice to get to a place where when we are in space with people, whether that be one-on-one or in a group, none of those thoughts exist for us. We are a complete empty vessel and in complete empty presence with the people that we are serving, so that whatever is meant to come through for them comes through to us, and we can help them transmute from there with no interference of our own ego.
Right, exactly.
Easier said than done.
Yes.
A lifelong practice.
Yes.
But one that's so worth it.
Now, would you consider yourself intuitive?
Yes, absolutely. And I believe also that intuition is a skill that can be developed. And I certainly know for myself that my journey with priestessing has improved that and my relationship with my inner voice enormously.
And what would you say is something that you do now that would classify you as being intuitive? What are some of the ways it comes through for you?
Well, I think our intuition is just really in a simple nutshell, Margaret, it's our inner voice. Mm-hmm. And if we want to have a strong relationship with our intuition and see it come forward, we have to view it as a relationship. And like any relationship, if we don't pay attention to it, if we don't create space for it to come through and be nurtured and listened to, then that relationship won't be strong. And so the number one thing that I did to strengthen my relationship is to be still more, to be quiet more, and to allow the softness of it more space to be able to come forth. And then when it did come forth, as crazy as sometimes it felt and sounded, I chose to deeply trust it and listen to it, knowing that it was coming from a deep, deep part inside me, mm-hmm. and that I would never, and that part of myself would never hurt me. It would never knowingly say anything or suggest anything or call for anything in any way that would mean that it was the wrong thing, but that I had to trust it, even if it was saying something to me that in my ego head sounded crazy. For example, like, you shouldn't launch that program because it's not really, that it's not really what you want to do. And my ego at the surface, though, might have been saying things like, well, this is an excellent way to make money. This is really what everybody else is doing. This seems to be the trend. This seems to be absolutely the right thing for you to do, so let's do it.
Right.
Right? So this is a real life example. But then my soul, when I allowed my intuition and my intuitive voice to come through, it said, you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. You know that you don't want to do that. Yes, you can do it well, but it's not going to allow you to be in service and have the level of contact with people that you know is deeply important to you. You have to find another way. And yes, I know that you're 3 months down the track of the planning, but that's it.
Yeah.
And so often when we hear voices, that sort of voice inside us, and it's saying something that we think, oh, no, I don't want to hear that. Well, we ignore it. And I'm so glad that I didn't ignore it, because I now know that what that decision was for me was absolutely being made out of okay, well, everyone seems to be doing this. I suppose I should too. And it wasn't the right decision, and I'm glad I didn't go ahead with it.
Mm. And so how does your intuition come through for you? Is it something that you hear, or is it a feeling in your body?
It's both. But for me, mostly it's something that I hear. For different people, it's a feeling. It's an embodied feeling. And sometimes I get those, but most of the time it is a soft, intuitive voice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And which, you're right, you do need to have that quiet time in order to hear that.
Absolutely. You can't otherwise. It won't come forth unless you make space for it.
Right. And being in an everyday kind of hectic lifestyle of running around and doing this, and this, it's not going to come through. I have the most downloads or intuitive hits and ideas that just float in. Actually, when I do yoga, because I'm not really thinking about, what am I doing? Because I'm kind of listening to her, but there's definitely times when I'm holding a pose and it's quiet and I'm just focused and being present in that moment. Ideas will just start popping in. Or I'm on a hike and I'm really not thinking about anything. I don't listen to podcasts or music or put my headphones on when I go on a hike. That is like off limits. So I usually, I tend to go on hikes alone because I need the silence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I can completely relate to that as well. When I go walking on the beach or I'm out walking in nature, as much as it would be lovely to take my phone and take pictures or Insta stories or something like that, I very, very rarely do it because I know that just creates a barrier for me between the connection of Mother Earth and my soul and my intuitive voice. And so I very rarely do that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally get it. Well, this has been such a wonderful conversation. Is there anything that you would like to leave us with, or something that we didn't talk about that you really want the listeners to know about?
Oh my gosh, I think we've covered so much. Everything from soulful business to chakras to witches to priestesses to intuition. I think we've been around the world and back again in, such a short space of time. So just thank you so much for having me, Margaret. It's always a joy to connect with new people and listeners.
Yes. And how can people find you?
I think the best place to find me is juliesuzanneparker.com, where you can find out more about my Priestess work and the Priestess podcast. And if you're more interested in the life coaching realm of things, that is at beautifulyoucoachingacademy.com.
Okay. And all of this will be in the show notes. Okay. And let's see here. Oh, and you're on Instagram, yes?
Yes, I am. Yep, I absolutely love Instagram. It's a really wonderful platform. I'm such a visual person, so to me, it really appeals to me in that way. And the link, if anyone wants that, is at my Julie Suzanne Parker website.
Oh, okay. And is that what it's under, the Instagram? It's under your name, or is it under Beautiful You?
Well, we have two separate ones. Yes, because the Academy is very large, and so it has its own life, and it's just under BYC Academy. And for me personally, Julie Parker is such a common name; I couldn't get that on Instagram. So I am Julesy Parker, which is JULESY Parker. That's where you'll find me.
Okay, I'll have that in the show notes as well. So I always end my interviews by asking 3 really quick questions. So the first one is, what do you have at your bedside right now?
A stack of books, all connected to the divine feminine.
What is one that you've been loving?
Witch by Lisa Lister.
Oh, yes.
I have been really enjoying reading that. I love Lisa's irreverent, humorful, really down-to-earth writing style. It's fantastic.
Yes, I've had her on the podcast talking about her book when it right before it came out. It's really great to connect with her. Yeah, that was such a great interview. Let's see. What is one of your biggest indulgences that you don't mind spending money on?
Flowers. I absolutely love flowers, and I never, ever regret spending money on them, particularly when it's peony season. I absolutely love peonies, and I never, ever regret spending money on flowers. I just think they're extraordinary, beautiful, natural. They fill my soul. Absolutely.
Do you have fresh flowers on your altar space or no?
Absolutely, without question. Okay. Absolutely, yeah. And even if, for some reason I've not been able to get to the florist, it will be some living plant of some kind. So it may even just be some beautiful leaves or, branches from a plant outside. But most of the time, always flowers. So, yeah, they're very important, I feel, for a living altar, for an altar to have that living energy on it. And that's why crystals are so important, I think, on an altar too, because they have an energy that emanates from them that is really important. Yeah.
Curious, do you have any form of water on your altar?
Through the flowers.
Through the flowers.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Although if I'm calling in a particular goddess that's very, very connected to water, then I would probably just have a separate bowl of water and have that as part of it as well. But if she didn't have any sort of direct connection to water, then the water would be what would house the flowers.
Okay, awesome. And then curious, the last question is, what's your astrological sign?
I'm a Leo, and I'm a very, very typical Leo. I am pretty much the epitome of my sign.
I love it. I love it. Okay. Well, Julie, thank you so much for spending this time with all of us and sharing all your beautiful gifts with us. I really love and appreciate everything that you are doing for women and for teaching coaches and for helping women to really step into who they really are. And just the fact that, I love your sacred practices, and thank you for also giving me some ideas here on to liven up my altar space, because it has been feeling stale. And so, how often do you change? Is this like a seasonal thing, or is it really like a monthly thing for you?
It's very much whatever I feel called to.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes it goes monthly around the new moon. Other times it's more seasonal, and sometimes it's just a feeling that I get that it's time to change.
Yeah, I'm getting that feeling. And I wasn't really sure. So thank you for, I think I needed to hear this because it's time for a change.
It's a pleasure.
Well, Julie, thank you so much, and really happy to connect, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks so much for having me, Margaret. It's been beautiful.
Oh, you're welcome. And if you enjoyed this episode, I welcome you to head on over to the website to learn more about Julie Parker, and for all the show notes to margaretromero.com/episode 45. And I would so love it if you would leave a review in iTunes. If you have been loving these episodes, loving Wisdom for the Weekend, and I actually have something new coming up this fall that'll be pretty fun. It'll be about once a month. More details coming up with that. So have the most beautiful week, and love to you all. Big hugs. Take care now. Bye-bye.